Okay, so welcome everybody who's watching to the EPiServer Developer Weekly show thing. Still working on the name. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue. If you have any suggestions, feel free to let me know. But it should be a good episode. We're going to be talking about Ektron Taxonomy. And if you have any questions, then feel free to reach out on Twitter using hashtag EPIDEV. That's EPIDEV. And with that, I'll let Brad Steele introduce himself first.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brad Steele. I'm with Hint Tech. Let's see. My history goes back with EPiServer, almost 5 years. But I've been using CMSs, DMSs, and all sorts of other MSs since the turn of the century.
Since the turn of the century, it makes you sound older.
I know.
Makes me feel older. You phrase it that way. Right, and David.
My name's David. I feel younger now. I'm a senior technology consultant with Celerity, and I've been working with Ektron since the 7.0 days, and still work with it, but don't have very much experience at all with EPiServer right now, so I won't be speaking to that today.
But we'll get that fixed soon enough.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, so I know that the show tends to start a little late for some reason, so we'll do our introductions and then people start joining. So I think we need intro music. We need like a 15, 20-second intro video if somebody wants to create that for me.
Well, you've Taylor Swift lyrics following you on Twitter now, so you can probably...
Yeah, I do. I do have Taylor Swift lyrics following me on Twitter. Unfortunately, I don't get any of the references. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about Ektron Taxonomy. Would either of you like to jump in and just kind of give your own definition for taxonomy in general, and then apply it to Ektron?
Sure.
Okay. Nobody jump in all at once. No.
What is taxonomy? Taxonomy is a way to name things and categorize things. And as we were kind of talking about before the show started, things don't just have one name.
Things don't just have one name. Okay. I'm going to ask for clarity on that one.
The classification system where you can have a many-to-many relationship. You can have multiple items per one category or multiple categories per one item. So something can fit into a news article that also corresponds to an event type. Maybe the news is a big celebration that's coming up, and you also have a celebration event type that uses that same content of that same item. So an item can be classified in numerous ways, and it can fit into any several categories. To expand on what Brad said, I think a really good way to classify it is users in the system, because anybody who's familiar with a user base and like Active Directory knows that you can have a user who not only has administrative privileges, but also might have editor privileges, where you might have an editor who is also a reader or a visitor. So it's that kind of combination of categorization.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to that, and thank you both. One thing I'll add to that is taxonomy is often hierarchical. It doesn't necessarily need to be, but it usually is. And then the good point of reference to point back to, if you think back to your school days, is the taxonomies that they would put animals and plants and different classifications of living things into a taxonomy. You know, your genus and species, or however that worked. I'm really bad at that right now. Memory's gone, but if you can recall that, you've got the animal kingdom, plant kingdom, that's kind of where it starts, and then you've got different genuses and species below that. So inside of Ektron, we do have taxonomy. It's hierarchical, and one of the really powerful things that I think makes Ektron a little bit unique is that you can classify almost any object inside the system. So you can classify your content, your assets, your library images and files, even the stored hyperlinks, users, groups, and that to me makes quite a bit of difference. It's being able to classify, and I really like. I think David, you said it was classification was one of the words you threw out, and I think classification is really the best term for it. So I think categorization gets confused with tagging to some degree.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that little distinction between classify versus categorize can be very important when you are thinking about it.
So Brad, you've been doing a lot with digital asset management. I imagine that classification is a big factor there.
Yeah, actually, in the system that we work in, Atom, classification is the central navigation in the system. So everything you put in there has to belong in at least one classification in one folder, so to speak, or it is essentially non-existent in the system. I mean, it really has to be classified for it to really exist at all in the system. And we really tie, in this particular system, we tie not only image assets and content together, but we also tie it into a product system. So there's this whole mix of, is it an asset, is it a product, is it something that works in a product? And in the end, it all comes down to everything's sort of a record, right? But everything has to have its classifications. And we were talking about that in Atom. Assets are classified, products are categorized. It's kind of a different nomenclature, but it helps the user of the system really understand kind of where they are.
Yeah. So understanding that there can be a distinction, that there is sometimes even a need for different types of architectures that are better, or different solutions, different ways of relating content, classifying, categorizing, tagging, etc. Even inside of Ektron, we've got folder relationships and collection relationships and content selectors and all of these things. So what in your minds, for either of you, makes taxonomy more appropriate for a situation or less appropriate for a certain situation?
I'll jump into this one for a really obvious example that not a lot of people really think about, but calendar events in the system have to be defined as taxonomies. And I've been on a project where we had internal groups, we'll call them organizations within the customer or the company. Each one might have had their own event calendar. So each one has their own folder. Each department has their own section inside of the content folders for Ektron, and they can manage their own calendar. But then there's a global calendar that can reference all of these different events with these different calendars. So no matter what, when you create a calendar inside of your calendar folder, it's considered a calendar event. So it gets assigned to the calendar event in the global calendar events. But at the same time, it gets created inside of the specific taxonomy category for that organization. Additionally, instead of just being an event for that organization, it might exist as a specific type of event, either something that's off-site or on-site, a meeting, a celebration, a deadline piece, something like that. So it's a good opportunity to use the taxonomy in that case, because aside from the fact that every event has to be a taxonomy, you have multiple content items spread out across multiple folder structures throughout your site to make it more easily managed by the owners of those folders, but at the same time, they can all come together within one category in your taxonomy or classification.
Right. Yeah. So Brad, any input on that question as well?
Well, you know, David, what you said earlier, the whole idea of many-to-many, that's really the thing you want to see when you think to yourself, okay, do I need this in a list? Do I need to have a property on it? When I know that this object, whether it's a piece of content or an image or a web page itself, a complete web page, when I know that that's going to exist in different ways or need to be used or thought of in different ways, that's when I want to look at categorizing it into a taxonomy. When the hierarchy needs to be there, then I know that I need to say, okay, this all belongs here, but it's different. So it's a house, but this is a ranch house, and that is a duplex, right?
Yep.
And so that's really when you want to start thinking about, is a taxonomy the appropriate way to group this? The worst use of taxonomy is in a single hierarchical structure, such as navigation.
That's a good point.
Using it for navigation is ridiculous unless your navigation is really a faceted type of approach. If you have a linear hierarchical navigation, that would be the worst use of a taxonomy.
I would even go so far as to say when you have a linear hierarchical navigation, you should be using a menu.
You should.
That's exactly what it was designed to do. So the origin story for taxonomy is that Ektron clients were using menus to do that categorization and classification prior to taxonomy being a feature inside of Ektron. So we would end up with clients. I think there was one who had was trying to put in tens of thousands of items into a single menu structure, and it was really killing the system. So a taxonomy feature got added.
Well, also taxonomy is or the menus are an explicit organization, right?
Yeah.
I create a menu, it links out to a bunch of items. With taxonomy, it's an implicit organization. I have an object. What is it, right? It's a duplex, which is also a house. It's a single-family home. It's in this region, in this marketing area. So now I have all these facets that define what I have. I don't have to go have somebody else apply my thing to all those facets. I've already done that.
Right. So another use case that I find to be inappropriate is when you simply want to relate content item A to content item B.
Mm-hmm.
I really dislike seeing taxonomy being used that way. It's just another layer in the architecture that doesn't need to be there, because the two items could relate in a more direct fashion. Because that's too indirect. It's too abstract an architecture to provide that kind of a relationship. My mind, you're much better off using a smart form content reference or metadata content selector field to create those relationships. But I do see that from time to time where somebody's got a collection of content that all needs to be displayed together that really should just be one content item or used as one content item. But using taxonomy to group those things together, and each taxonomy node then represents a page that is the collection of these disparate items. So, yeah, good use of taxonomy is when you need that hierarchy. If you're just doing a flat list, then you can very readily do that with metadata and provide some kind of less free-form tagging with metadata, or use a collection or something like that, rather than going with something as fully featured and massive as taxonomy, because it really is a large architecture at the end of the day.
Well, in my experience, when taxonomy is used for the related items, right, because they all belong to the same category, that kind of thing, almost consistently, you're going to end up with an item in there you don't want. Yeah. And you can't get rid of it because it belongs there. It needs to be in the category, but you don't want it on the page. So then you end up having to add metadata saying, well, okay, I don't want this.
Or a custom property to the taxonomy.
Or a custom property, yep. So Joe asks a question. Have you ever? I'm going to paraphrase Joe because I think there's a typo there. Have you ever seen clients who want to use taxonomy for security? And he says Gandalf knows what I'm talking about. I think I do. And what we're getting into there, and this is actually one of my favorite uses for taxonomy, is something like a portal or an extranet, and being able to provide a filtered experience.
Back to the organizational structure idea.
Yeah, it does go to the org structure idea, but you're classifying all of your content based on the organizational structure. So it's classified with the department that it belongs in, and you do need hierarchy because one vice president might have multiple departments who each have their own leaders, who each have their own teams within that. So there is an element of hierarchy there, and you want that top level person, that top level VP manager person, to be able to see recursively all of the content that's below them in the hierarchy. And so that actually leads into just a very small demo, because I was trying to explain to somebody else about taxonomy earlier. It was actually yesterday. So let me know if you guys can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Just a little bit bigger, but I've got just a very basic page, Bootstrap page, that's going to show the logged in user, the categories to which the user belongs, and then the visible content within those categories. And it's just automatically generated data that's been thrown into the CMS. This started as a min site yesterday, so I've not had a lot of time to make something really pretty. Not that I make very much that's really pretty.
We're developers. It's not our job.
No. So if I log in as JMember and I'll go into the work area as well, then I'm going to see that JMember is only able to see the 9, 6, 3, 7, right? They're not able to see 497 and 498 in between these. They're listed as being in category B, right? I log out, log back in as admin, then I'm going to be this is actually category B's parent category, and I get to see all of the items that are in that. I'm just selecting the top 10. Oh, that didn't work very well. So I pop into the work area and look at the taxonomies. We can see the structure here. There's actually no content in content samples categories. But if I look at the users assigned there, then I'll see the admin user. So in this way, we're actually able to say when the user's logged in, then apply these category filters to all of your content requests. And the content manager has a content taxonomy criteria that will allow you to do this relatively easily. If I look at category B and look at the users, there's my JMember. So they're only allowed to see category B, but not anything in A or C. But anybody who's been assigned to the parent category gets to see content that's assigned to any of the children. Actually, I love this use for portals, and Joe and I did a project. This is why Joe knew I would know what he was talking about. We did a project that was a distributor portal, and when a distributor would log in, I think it was 80% of the site, including the site search results, was going through a category filter. Now, most of that was powered by search, but there's a bit of simple code that you can go through here. Just to replicate this process is you use user criteria, or taxonomy item criteria, rather, to get any users that have been assigned to this category. Or I'm sorry, I'm saying this backward, to get any categories that this user belongs to. So I'm passing in the user ID, I'm saying the type is user, and I only want to retrieve results that are in the current language. Because taxonomy is not language agnostic, or it can be, but it doesn't have to be. So this list, in this case, actually only returns one category, but it can return as many as I like. And then I pass that into filtering on the content that I'm going to retrieve. And then I have a required filter group to set the language that I want to retrieve as well. So you can use just regular filters and then add on to that anything in the required filter group that is mandatory. So if you wanted to filter by category and folder, then you could put the folder that you wanted to retrieve from to say only get news content or video content, and put that into the required filter group. So that's how we're retrieving the category and the content.
I think it's like the distributor example. I think is a great example too of the many-to-many relationship, because even though you're only showing one category per user, you could have a user that's a member of multiple categories and have overlap too. So I mean, if you have an item across one or two, then great. You know, that item is associated with multiple categories, and that person can be associated with multiple categories, so they can see all these different items. So in your admin case, you wouldn't necessarily have to use the top level, or you could have different levels of admins. You could have, you know, admin A, B, and C who can see, you know, different parent categories, or, you know, a combination of child categories to be able to manage their individual sections.
Yeah, I can readily take that JMember user and add them to A and C, and they'll be able to see all of the content that the admin at a level higher would see. The difference is that if you add a new category, then JMember will not automatically be getting that new content in a new category, but the admin user would.
Right, and that's another great example of how it can be used, because now JMember is not implicitly getting permission. They have to explicitly be defined by being assigned to the category.
Yeah. And so I'll ask Joe if that answers what he was looking for as well as he would like, or if he'd like to add anything else to that. For us, it was a major project, and that was new in Ektron 8.5 with the new search capabilities. So it was a very interesting and fun challenge. But for them, it was aligning with different product lines, which distributors were allowed to see information in what product lines. So an automotive distributor would not see the same product lines as a home electronics distributor, unless they were distributing both. That worked really well.
Yeah, the project that I'm working on right now, again, it's about products, right? And while the content and the assets and the media and everything that goes along with that product might be done, the product itself might not be ready, or it might be past end of life and in an archive status. So we're actually using the classification to determine the status of the actual product irrelevant to the status of the media and the content that goes along with it.
Yeah.
And that way, the service agents, they can see everything, right? Because they need to know what's coming. They need to know what's already archived when somebody calls about it. But marketing may not necessarily need to see anything that's not active, except for maybe the pending stuff. So they don't care about everything that's archived.
Right. Yeah. So any horror stories on taxonomy? Well, actually, I do want to bring up one other thing, because this came up from a partner recently who is using the Framework API getTree method on a really, really large taxonomy. So it's both very broad and very deep. What they found was the Framework API getTree method was slower than just doing a get list on each level, on each category on each level, and combining everything in .NET. Now that seems like it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense, but from what I understand, and I'm not a DBA, but from what I understand, recursion inside of SQL is notoriously slow. But you can do that same recursion on the .NET side, and even if you're making multiple calls to the database, it actually ends up being faster when you need to scale very large to the taxonomy.
Yeah, from experience, I can say that splitting up a SQL query into multiple small ones and then combining them is even quicker than doing a big query with joins and stuff. So, yeah, all that stuff, that makes total sense.
Yeah. So that's just a quick tip of the day. Another quick tip is if you want to retrieve content that's inside of a category, use the content taxonomy criteria and the content manager. Match the manager to the type of data you want returned.
That's a good tip.
Yeah. Don't use the content or the taxonomy item criteria with the taxonomy item manager unless you just want to get the assignment information, because that's all that's going to return. That's what I was using in the request to figure out what taxonomy categories were assigned to the user as taxonomy item manager, because all I'm interested in is the assignment.
I actually posted up a tree view user control that allows you to get content from folders and taxonomies based on types and stuff like that. And there's a section where I'm actually using the content taxonomy criteria and adding or preventing criteria from being added based on certain options that you set on the control. So if somebody wants to see an additional example of stuff, they can just go grab that. I wanted to touch on one thing that Brad mentioned too, is that he said that their products, or their documents rather, in one system were showing up based on classification. And if you didn't give it a classification, it didn't show up whether you meant for it to or not. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is the fact that a lot of people don't realize that you can assign a taxonomy category to a folder or a folder to the category. So you can have it automatically assign items entered into, say, a documents folder, so that whenever somebody enters something into the documents folder, it automatically shows up in the document category, but not necessarily by a subclassification. That's by doing that, it's actually giving you some good leverage to eliminate an extra step for a user or eliminate user error, where you want to be able to see that, and then they go, oh, wait a minute, I meant for that to show up as a specific type, so now they can go into the item and specify the subtype too. So I've seen numerous occasions where people were looking for some way to do that type of functionality, and it's right there built in. You just go into your taxonomy, assign folder to the category, and always, anytime something gets added into that folder, it pops up in that category you assigned to.
Yeah, and it's very important your client understands the difference.
Yes.
If they don't want that, you also want to make sure that you don't set it to the folder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the flip side is if you want people to explicitly have to define it, but you go into the taxonomy and assign the folder to the taxonomy, now every time they put something in, it's automatically going to be in there, even if you don't want it to be. So it's important to understand the differences between the two and when to use each one. That's a very good point to make, Brad.
I speak from experience.
Well, I always like to say you break your own stuff often enough, you learn how to fix everybody else's. That's one of those. That's what experience really is. Experience is made up of mistakes, not successes.
Hey, when I try to figure out something, the first thing I do is try to break it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happens if you pass null, as any good QA would ask?
That's actually one of the first things I've been trying lately on a new project.
There you go.
Yep. All right. Any other taxonomy tidbits? Any interesting uses for taxonomy that you would approve of or not approve of? Or we feel like we've got it?
Well, again, it's all about facets with taxonomy. For me, one of the biggest challenges is that gray area between, is it a metadata item, right? Is it a property on it, part of the smart form maybe, or is it a category or classification that attaches to it? And some things are obvious. Weight should be a property. It should be something either metadata or smart form. But color, right? Color, well, it could be either, right? And so there's a lot of times you got to ask yourself, well, how will I use this?
Right. Yeah. Does color belong to the content, or does the content belong to color?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. But you're right. It's how are you going to use it, and you need to work toward future-proofing your content as much as possible. Mm-hmm. Which means that if you're able to project into the future and say, well, how would this be different if I needed to display this information on a kiosk or a watch or a TV or something like that? If we're going to push it into a mobile app, you're going to let those kinds of futuristic brainstorming drive the decision that you need to make, is which of these is going to be the most flexible option moving forward without being too detrimental in the short term.
Yeah, and I think an interesting thing, just not even on that, you asked for interesting tidbits. Brad's talking about products in taxonomy, and I believe that one of the reasons custom properties were added to taxonomy categories was to help add additional detail or information to categories and items within the taxonomy for the e-commerce piece that was put in at one point. So it just, unfortunately, that also gives confusion to that extra point that Brad said. Should it be metadata? Should it be a custom property on it? Should it be a taxonomy? And now you've got this extra layer that's, okay, well, should it be a custom property on the taxonomy or metadata? So
right.
I think there can be some confusion around it. It's really important to understand your use case, because that really dictates how your taxonomy should be utilized.
Well, I've mostly seen those custom properties being used when taxonomy is used for navigation, in order to provide some relationship between a given category and a given piece of content. Typically, you don't have that relationship. You don't have a relationship that says this category represents this page. That relationship doesn't exist.
I've seen it used for products where you have a complex product type and a simple product type, and you don't necessarily want your simple product types or accessories in the same category showing up in a listing for selecting a product to purchase or to list, but you want it to be available for any of those products to be added. So if you choose a complex product type, well, then you list out the simple product types that are also in the category that can be associated with it, which again goes back to your, should I associate content here or should I associate content with the content item? But it's where it breaks down in the category, being able to control what's displayed in the list necessarily. So best example is you have a product listing, which is a grid view on the page, and you have certain ones that you want to be available for search or categorization, but you don't want it to be displayed to the user, for instance. So you have a custom property that's displayed to user.
Yeah. So one thing I will say is, Brad, you were talking about faceting, which in CMS world, especially with Ektron and EPiServer, we look at faceting from a search perspective.
Yeah.
And faceting in that regard is often not hierarchical. You can do departmental drill downs, but it's often price range. So you'll do buckets for price range, or you might do, if it's, I'm thinking of something like property listings.
Yeah.
You'll have price range, number of rooms, things like that are not hierarchical. You can do ranges, but it's not hierarchical data. You're not really drilling down like you would on Amazon, drilling it down into departments and classifications for clothing and things like that. So
yeah, true. Yeah, when you're dealing with that, and most of the time you're right, it's one level, right? And I'd say in a lot of cases with faceted search, you really do want it to be a property of the object, like your weight.
Right.
Because then, okay, I'm going to break down my facets by weight range, but my objects are each going to have a very unique weight that fits in one of those ranges.
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we're drawing a line of distinction there, because if you're trying to use taxonomy for all of your search facets, you're going to make life a lot harder for yourself than it really needs to be.
But where you have a general category for your search facet where you can drill down into specific types, then it makes sense. You could have a taxonomy for a facet where you're searching for automotive parts, and then you drill down into automotive parts because you want something that's specific to interior, and then you drill down interior because you want to find something that's specific to seating or comforts. I mean, however you want to do it. It makes sense in that case too, because you could have something that is an interior part that's interior lighting as opposed to interior, upholstery or something. So
right. Well, it could be interior. It could be interior. It can be multiple categories, because it might be under the interior category as well as the electronic category.
Right. Or interior lighting could also be as part of a general lighting category that you have, which I actually run into that with some of the auto parts sites that I use, where you go and you don't know which one to find it in, but the good news is it pops up in both because it is classified that way, which is actually a really nice feature. So take that. If you're doing product listing, make it easy for people to find. Use taxonomy.
Yeah, and there are different solutions in e-commerce too. So some of that is just departmental drill down, but you certainly could use taxonomy to do something like that. My point is, if you can't really justify something hierarchical, then you probably should not be using taxonomy. You should be using metadata or some property on the content itself.
Yeah.
It's a lot more challenging to do faceting with taxonomy, at least in Ektron, than it is to do flat data that's related to the item itself.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're over time. Thank you both. I appreciate all of your wonderful insights around taxonomy. We've also been discussing, before we came on, we just tossed around the idea of maybe doing a Halloween episode this year and sharing horror stories. So if anybody wants to participate and contribute to that, feel free to let me know. I think that sounds like a really fun episode. Potentially dangerous, but really fun. That's what Halloween's all about, right?
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys very much, and I'll see you soon.
All right, thanks for having us.
All right.